What's up guys, it's Will back again, and today's review is Spider-Man Homecoming. Spider-Man Homecoming is a Marvel superhero film that was directed by Jon Watts and is the third version of the Spider-Man character we've seen in the last 15 or so years. So Spider-Man Homecoming takes place not long after the events of Civil War, where a young Peter Parker is desperate to prove himself and become an Avenger. Spider-Man is instructed to stay close to the ground, so he spends a decent chunk of his time stopping thieves on the streets or even foiling bank robberies, but he craves something more. He craves a ticket to the big show with the Avengers. But Peter still has a lot of other things to worry about before he can become an Avenger, like trying to be a high school kid, trying to fit in and make friends, and of course trying to impress the girl of his dreams. But he becomes distracted when he catches wind of an underground arms trade led by Michael Keaton's character Adrian Toomes that Spider-Man attempts to put a stop to, but quickly realizes the task is a lot more difficult than he originally anticipated. And the rest of the film is spent watching Peter attempt to stop these criminals from their illegal activity in an attempt to prove himself, while we also watch him attempt to navigate his way through high school. Okay, so Spider-Man Homecoming was obviously a movie that was basically on everyone's radar, everyone that enjoys the superhero genre that is. And the early reviews for the film were, let's say, more than stellar, with the film currently sitting at a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. And you also factor in that this is the first Spider-Man film we've seen in the current MCU, which obviously carries some lofty expectations. And this Spider-Man film certainly met a few of my expectations, but it certainly let me down in a few other areas as well. I think Homecoming is a film that has to be Marvel's most family-friendly installment to date. Whether this was a Sony idea or a Marvel idea, this film makes a very concerted effort to be funny and to be something that viewers of all ages can enjoy. This approach works pretty well overall, but it certainly wore on me over time because it just felt like Homecoming was way more concerned with trying to be cute and funny than actually trying to progress our characters, most specifically Peter, in any meaningful way. There are some absolutely hilarious scenes in this film that are great, and there are several others where the characters are cracking jokes like every 15 seconds, and I was just like, Jesus, give it a rest. It was funny at first, but it was getting old fast. This isn't to say a lot of the humor isn't clever, because that's not true. It mostly is, but there's like a humor overload because there's a lot of characters trying to be funny at once, and it becomes problematic after a while because this movie gets way too cute way too often. This isn't really the fault of any of the actors. There's not one single bad performance in this entire movie. Tom Holland is the perfect actor for this version of Peter Parker because he's funny, he's capable, he's witty, and he's also dynamic. He really feels and looks the part, and that's something that I think was lacking from the Amazing Spider-Man series. This is a very different Spider-Man than we've seen before, however. He's much more ingrained in the high school experience than I've ever seen out of any Spider-Man before. Considering this film is called Spider-Man Homecoming, this version of the character spends a lot of his time in school or doing kid things with his friends. There's a deliberate attempt to try to develop Peter by driving home the point that he is a 15-year-old high schooler. He's not mature, he's not a super experienced hero, he's a kid that craves adventure, but for now has to deal with the realities of everyday life as a teenager. I don't have a problem with that approach. What I do have a problem with is just how much time you spend with Peter watching him do these high school things and how little time you spend with Spider-Man. You totally wouldn't get that idea from the promotional materials because the majority of the photos and trailers show Spider-Man and not Peter Parker, but what Homecoming actually delivers you is quite the opposite. I think it's important that you understand going into this film that it feels very different from a lot of the other Marvel films that have come before it. There honestly isn't a whole lot of action in this movie. The vast majority of the runtime is spent watching Peter navigate the waters of high school and try to learn more about the underground arms dilemma outside of the spandex, and that's something that's going to disappoint a lot of moviegoers that come in with a very different expectation. The action you do get is very exciting. It looks nice, it's fun to watch Spider-Man swing around and do cool stuff, but there are definitely some things that I didn't like. Firstly, in Homecoming, Spider-Man is super goofy and clumsy. He'll be swinging around and then fall right smack dab on his face, or swing through a yard and fall into a tent, like just stuff that gets really old after a while. Instead of Spider-Man that's competent and badass, we get a clumsy goofball that constantly swings into shit. This happens a bunch of times and it never goes anywhere. It feels like cheap laughs at the expense of the character. The counter argument to this is going to be, well, Will, that's because this is an origin story for a 15-year-old kid and he hasn't quite grasped the full potential of his powers yet. Sure, I get that. The problem, however, lies in the fact that the Spider-Man we saw in Civil War was drastically different than the Spider-Man we see in Homecoming. The airport fight scene where Spider-Man kicks ass super confidently is not the Spider-Man we see this time around. They really brought him down a notch and it makes him feel weak, especially compared to what what we saw him do in Civil War against other enhanced individuals. There's also problems I have with the stakes. While Michael Keaton does a really nice job playing Vulture, there's just something about the core conflict that feels too small and inconsequential. The stakes just don't feel like they're big enough a lot of the time because the film is hell-bent on putting Spider-Man on the rookie setting. I'm not expecting like Avengers big or Civil War big, but there's something about this very confined conflict that just doesn't matter all that much in the bigger picture. In a universe where aliens are flying in and Hydra attempts to kill millions, a crew of guys selling underground weapons just doesn't seem all that important. For those of you concerned about the intrusive presence of Iron Man in this movie, don't be. Tony Stark is only in a few scenes and really doesn't play that big a role in this film. This is like 95% Spider-Man's movie, and Iron Man is a very small part of the overall story. It doesn't feel overly intrusive at all. You definitely get plenty of Peter Parker and just enough Tony Stark. It may seem like I didn't like this movie, but I actually did like it. I never really found myself bored or checking the time on my phone, but I did find myself wanting things to be a little bit more exciting. And really, I think that boils down to the expectations that I came into the film with. I expected an exciting superhero film with lots of action and great characters, but in reality, Homecoming is more like a comedy coming-of-age film with Spider-Man in it than anything else. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I just want to further drive home the point that this film, in comparison to other Marvel movies, is relatively light on high-stakes action. It's more about the comedy and the growth of the kids, so just be aware of that going in. But overall, I can't say I love Spider-Man Homecoming, but I still enjoyed it. I thought it had some awesome acting from a very talented cast, some witty humor, some amazing action sequences, and an extremely likable protagonist. Sadly, I also felt the humor often overstayed its welcome, the stakes don't always feel as high as they should, and Spider-Man himself felt overly goofy, inconsistent, and occasionally weak. I'm gonna give Spider-Man Homecoming a 7.5 out of 10, and generally recommend you check this one out in theaters if you're a fan of Spider-Man or you're just looking for some good fun. So did you guys see Spider-Man Homecoming yet? What did you think of it? And if not, let me know why not. And also let me know your favorite Marvel film to date. I'm an Avengers guy myself. That's all for now though. This is WillFoxification signing off. See you in the next review.